So the kind of argument that's usually given is that if we don't have something like Social Security and Medicare, the elderly will starve in the streets. Now, there's an interesting test case for this. What happens when people don't have old age welfare programs? And it's called America for Every Year until 1935, which, by the way, if you can do the math, is longer than we've had Social Security since 1935. Now, did the elderly starve in the streets? And it turns out that amazingly, no. Amazingly, people figured out a way to live without handouts for over 100 years, and it's pretty fantastic when you think about it. They were very entrepreneurial in their whole approach to life. And so I'm just going to go through some of the mechanisms that they took in order to not, as they say, starve in the streets. So first of all, people worked. It's kind of funny today where we think of like, oh, work's a real burden. But actually, the people pushing for a welfare state complained for many years because the elderly, those darn people, refused to retire. The fact is that they found their lives more meaningful, more valuable, more enjoyable with work than without it. And they saved. Who has a savings of more than 0%? If you do, you are the 1%, because most Americans don't. People at that era saved between 1/8 and 1/9 of their income, which is, that's impressive. Credit, obviously, is, if you couldn't support yourself, various forms of credit were available. Turning to friends, family, community, informal ways of helping people. Does anybody know what the number one thing people did? So first of all, before industrialization, before people were really dealing with retirement, what was the number one retirement plan? Anybody know? Close. That comes later. The first retirement plan was actually death. You worked and then you died and then you didn't have a retirement plan. But now we have industrialization. People are living longer. And yeah, that's exactly what they did. The number one thing people did is they lived with their kids. And when you think about it, Social Security is in effect like an indirect way of us all taking care of other people's grandparents. Like it's in effect the government wheels over somebody else's grandma, shoves her into our lawn and says, here, you watch her for a while. But no, what most people did is they took care of their own parents if they needed it. There were also things called mutual aid societies. Now, anybody heard of like an Elks Lodge or a Moose Lodge or something? I'd love to see these reemerge. They're kind of cool. But these are, in effect, the descendants of mutual aid societies. And these were community groups, in effect, where you would pay your monthly membership due, and you would be entitled to certain kinds of, then, support from the club. And it might be things like unemployment insurance. It might be things like private health care. You'd have a lodge doctor you could see. Or it could be a retirement thing. They had they had retirement homes where if you couldn't support yourself, you would go and you'd be able to stay at the society's retirement lodge. And finally, there was charity, private charity, which in this era was abundant. Again, we're talking about pre-1935. And people per capita were giving more to charity then than they did today. And so what were the results of this? Was it people starving in the streets? No. The fact is that what was happening with immigration were people fleeing the shores of America, trying to get away from this wretched area where people were starving in the streets and going to those countries that had welfare programs. Anybody know what was going on with immigration at this time? This is the biggest wave of immigration to America. Indeed, the people pushing for welfare state programs, which they started doing really in the 1880s, modeled after Bismarck's Germany, they said, well, we don't have to worry about old people in America. They're doing just fine. We have to worry about poor people. So they spent 30 years trying to create welfare programs for poor people. And then they realized, oh, Americans don't care about poor people. Let's focus on old people because most of us one day aspire to being old. So let's do that. And then they eventually succeed in 1935, as we talked about. But the best statistics we have in terms of what's going on then. And we don't have great statistics, so take these with a big grain of salt. But the best ones we have tell us that by 1935, only 8% of the elderly need any form of formal charity, whether it's private or whether it's the kind of minuscule government level programs going on. And what I'm showing here is I want us to remember what's going on historically. So I'm talking about 8% of the elderly need any kind of formal help. And you can extend this line back to infinity. But basically, for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, human beings have been living just above subsistence. We're dealing with a time frame right here where capitalism, economic freedom has only started to enrich us. And already, people are productive and smart enough so that only 8% need any sort of formal assistance in order to achieve economic security. So if we're thinking about economic security then, the bottom line is that clearly a welfare state is not necessary, and indeed it undermines our economic security by giving the government the power to take away as much of our economic resources as it decides is in the public good. But now let's turn to the biggie. Watkins, I want to help people. You're being a jerk who's just talking about the cost. What about the benefit to these people who need help? What I want to stress, and the major point I want to make about this, is that whether or not you want to help people is totally irrelevant to whether or not there should be a welfare state. Totally irrelevant. First of all, we've seen people are helping people immensely during this time. Most people don't need help. The vast majority of us are able to support ourselves throughout our lifetime, including old age. But those who did, the vast majority are being helped privately, voluntarily. You're able to help the people that you care about. Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Sure. So the question is, how do we compare the help available today versus before the welfare state? If we just compare the amount of giving as a percent of GDP, today it's about 1.5%. That number might not be exactly right, but it's in the ballpark. 1.5% of GDP goes to charity. Then it was over 2%. It's something close to 2.5%. So a vastly greater percentage is going in that way. It's more difficult once you start comparing, well, how do we count the welfare state? Does that count as some kind of percent of giving or something like that? But the bottom line is that it increases significantly. It basically was double as a percent of what people are actually taking home. So the major fact, though, is then if we're talking about is it good to help people, do I want to help people, it's irrelevant. And the way I like to think about it is this. So imagine that you are in the situation not where you want to help somebody, but you're in need of help. Let's say you need an operation that you can't afford. So you go over to your neighbor's house, and you knock on the door, and you say one of two things. One is, hey, I need an operation, I can't afford it, would you please help me? Fair enough. The other one is, hey, I need an operation, you owe me. What the welfare state is about, and this is kind of the key point I want to stress, the welfare state is not an issue of, I want to help people. The welfare state is an issue of, people are in need, and that imposes a debt on everybody else. It's an entitlement. Under the welfare state logic, now I've asked thousands of people, how would you behave if you were in that situation? And I've never met a person that says, yeah, I would regard myself as entitled to somebody's help. You know, he might want to send his kid to school. He might want to pay off his mortgage, but darn, he owes me first and foremost. But that's what the entitlement state says. That's what the whole welfare state is built around. It's the idea of you are entitled. If you're in need, regardless of its source, regardless of other people's hopes, dreams, priorities, and rights, they owe you because you're in need. So often what will happen when anybody challenges the welfare state is that you're the jerk who wants to throw grandma off a cliff, right? You want to take away her handouts, you're going to throw her off a cliff. And I think the bottom line here is that the exact opposite is the truth. So first of all, the idea that not giving somebody handouts is the equivalent of throwing them off a cliff. I mean, that's like saying if a thief came to your house and was like, hey, give me your wallet, and you said no, you're throwing him off a cliff, because how is he going to buy his Doritos? No, the truth is the exact opposite. It's young people today by the welfare state who are being thrown off a cliff. $205 trillion. Already you're working a month and a half without pay. And once it gets to 2, 3, 4 months, that is what it means to be thrown off a cliff. That is what it means to be detracted from actually achieving the things that you want to achieve in this world. Who knows who Russell Brand is? Often I speak to older audiences and they have no clue, and this story just goes whoop. So I guess over a year ago, I went and I was supposed to do Russell's show Brand X, and we were supposed to debate the issue of self-interest. But after the show, I was talking to him, and I was telling him about this whole problem, and I was saying, look, he's kind of a socialist, so I was saying, look, the welfare state is treating young people as servants. And these debt numbers are going to turn people into actual servants. And he looked at me thoughtfully, which was quite an achievement, and he said, isn't that the point? And he's right. The whole point of the welfare state is to force you to serve other people. And so there's a reason that nobody blinks. The numbers I gave you, this is not some secret theory that I've unearthed from the archives of like Don Watkins' conspiracy theory. Everybody in Washington knows this. Everybody in Washington will admit it, except for people like Elizabeth Warren, who are basically debt deniers who say, oh, let's increase Social Security. But setting that aside, this is a well-known problem, but they don't blink an eye, because the whole idea is that you should be serving others. You shouldn't be so focused on your happiness. You guys are in this room to what? Learn to be healthier, learn to be more fit, learn to get in better relationships, that is selfish. You guys should not be focused on that. You should be focused on serving others. And the welfare state, it's going to make you. And so that's the deeper meaning of the debt draft, is it's making you do exactly what the welfare state says you should do, which is be a servant. I mean, basically what the welfare state does is it divides us into a caste of burdens and resources. We're burdens when we receive handouts, right? And then we're resources, we're in a position to pay for other people's handouts. Now that is a really, really awful way to view human beings, in my view. In my view, and I think this was the founder's view, which is that you have a right to exist for your own sake. You have a right to come into this room and try to make the best of your life, even if those guys out there are not making the best of their lives. The whole idea that you have to serve others and subjugate yourself to them is a really ignoble view of human relationships. Each of us should be free to make the most of our own lives. So how do we get this so wrong? If what I'm saying is right, then how is it common sense? How is it conventional wisdom that the welfare state is a great achievement? And so I want to say a few words about this before we wrap up.
We're taking a different look of something that we've been diving into in the last couple of years. Now, we have Don Watkins right here. How Social Security is sabotaging the land of self-reliance. Bring it on home. Good stuff, man.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, you got it.
By the way, if you can do the math, is longer than we've had Social Security since 1935. Now, did the elderly starve in the streets? And it turns out that amazingly, no. Amazingly, people figured out a way to live without handouts for over 100 years, and it's pretty fantastic when you think about it. They were very entrepreneurial in their whole approach to life. And so I'm just going to go through some of the mechanisms that they took in order to not, as they say, starve in the streets. So first of all, people worked. It's kind of funny today where we think of like, oh, work's a real burden. But actually, the people pushing for a welfare state complained for many years because the elderly, those darn people, refuse to retire. The fact is that they found their lives more meaningful, more valuable, more enjoyable with work than without it. So the first reason, I think, is what I call the collectivist premise. And this is looking at the welfare of the group rather than the well-being of the individual. And says, what's good for, quote, society as a whole? How should we distribute society's resources in a fair way? I think the better way, the more rational way to think about political issues is to focus on the individual. And I think if you think about what's good for the individual, you come to a very different conclusion. So the two essentials, in my judgment, of what makes a happy and successful life, and I think this came through in all the talks today, is thought and effort. This is Isaac Newton and Steve Jobs.